starting the session, the international keynote speaker for our group, Information System Group at EnANPAD. And we have the honor to receive Professor Michael Myers here at our conference. It's really an honor to have you here at our conference. Just to let people know, I met Professor Michael Myers last year in Auckland at the Confirm conference, and he was presenting his keynote speech about the ontological reversal. And this concept was very interesting. I was amazed by this insight. So I invited Professor Myers to come here, and he kindly accepted our invitation. The original idea was for Professor Myers to come here to Brazil, Porto Alegre. He would give a workshop as well, qualitative research. It would be a fantastic opportunity. Unfortunately, things went out a little different, but anyway, it's an honor for us to have you here in our virtual conference. So before you begin, let me present to the audience your bio briefly. Michael Myers is Professor of Information Systems at the University of Auckland Business School, New Zealand. His work has been published in many journals, including Communications of the ACM, Communications of the AIS, European Journal of Information Systems, Information and Management, MIS Quarterly, and several others. He wrote a book entitled Qualitative Research in Business and Management that Professor Myers, many of us cited your book and research in our own paper. So it's really an honor to have you here. And he won the Best Paper Award for the most outstanding paper in MIS Quarterly in 1999. And he also won the Best Paper Award within the Harvard for the Best Paper published in Information Technology and People in 1997. He currently serves as editor of European Journal of Information System and has previously served as senior editor of MIS Quarterly from 2001 to 2005. And he is a fellow and Leo Award winner of the Association for Information Systems. So Professor Michael Myers, it's really an honor to have you here. So you can go on with your talk, and then we will get questions in the chat after you finish your presentation. Thank you very much, Professor Myers. The virtual floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Cesar. It's a pleasure to be in Brazil, well, virtually anyhow. And I'm sorry I can't be there, but with COVID-19, obviously, while we in New Zealand, we can't travel anywhere now, except we can travel in New Zealand, fortunately. So we seem to have got the COVID-19 reasonably under control. Of course, we're a small country, so it's, I guess, a bit easier. And we're surrounded by this big ocean. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, at least virtually. And so today, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about this idea of digital first. So I'll just share my screen. And so this is an idea that, well, and of course, lots of companies have the idea of digital first. And I want to explain what we think it means. What does digital first mean? And the word here is the ontological reversal. Now, this is ontology is a philosophical word. Of course, it's used in IT as well, information systems and computer science as well. But what we mean is that ontology means the nature of the world. What is our world like? Ontology is about the nature of the world. And so what is our world like today? And what we're suggesting is that our world is changing, that it's reversing. So, and I'll explain what this means. In the past, it was physical first. We had a physical world, and the real world, if you like, was, you know, like I'm going out and see this beautiful scenery, that's the real world. And the digital was, in effect, a copy. So the digital represents the real world. Nowadays, we're suggesting it's sort of reversing. It's becoming the other way around. So I'll explain what this means and what the challenges are for us as researchers. So that's the topic today. And Actually, I'll just share the presentation screen. Sorry, I've just realized I've got the wrong screen here. Let me just check this one. There we are. Sorry, that's better. Just realized I've got the better screen now. So there we are. So anyway, so yeah, so this is the ontological reversal. And so I'm from, as you can see, I'm from Auckland. And this actually is based on a paper that I wrote with two other co-authors. One is Richard Baskerville at Georgia State University, and the one Youngjin Yu. And so this is the sort of idea that we came up with. So just to say a little bit about Auckland, this is where I live. This is my city. And it's a nice city. This is we live in a beautiful harbour. You see the campus is kind of in the middle there, sort of all around. This is a park. The downtown, you can't quite see most of it. It's to the left here, but there's a park here, and the campus is all around this sort of area here. So of course we have a nice harbour here, and actually this is where a yacht race called the America's Cup, which I'll talk about shortly. This will be held in the harbour here, around here, next year. So let's talk about our digital world. Now, for quite a few years now, I've been listening to Spotify. I used to have CDs. I've actually sold all of them now, and well, a while ago now actually. And I've been listening to Spotify for quite a while, and of course there are other apps as well you can use. I'm sure most of you using apps all the time. But what is happening with these apps? Well, one thing that I really like about Spotify is that, well, first of all, you can listen to music you like, but they come up with this new product, probably about 2 or 3 years ago now, and it's called, I like jazz, by the way. I like Brazilian jazz too, some fantastic musicians. There's, they come up with this product called Discover Weekly. And of course, what it is they're looking at what you've been listening to, what you like. So they know I like jazz, and what kind of jazz. And then they're looking at what everyone else is listening to. So it's, of course, big data. In effect, it's big data. It's looking at lots of other people, what they're up to, what they're listening to. Then it's suggesting things that, hey, okay, so Michael might like this. So it's curated, you know, it's curated music for me. And what I've found over the year or last couple of years is that they're getting better at predicting what I like. Of course, every now and again, they throw in something else, which is quite good. They throw something quite different. Occasionally, they'll throw in a classical piece, or they'll throw in something by, you know, something weird kind of thing. I guess that's good. They're sort of not just going by your preference. They're trying to sort of, in some ways, they seem to have this mindset of trying to broaden your horizons, which is a good idea. But basically, they're getting very good at predicting what I like. Now they've got new things now. About probably was a year ago, they came out with a new thing called Discover Your Daily Playlist. Then it was Release Radar, which is they see the artists that you like, and then they say, okay, well, they just released this new song or new album. So so they suggest that. So they're getting very good at predicting. So of course, we've taught, and at Auckland here, we've taught recommender systems for a long time. So they're recommending songs to me based on my individual preferences and based on what lots of other people are listening to, and are getting better and better at doing it. Of course, we have lots of other apps. So we have Google telling us what the time to leave is. I remember many years ago, I was getting acupuncture. It's probably about 3 or 4 years ago now, at a clinic out in another part of Auckland. As soon as I come out of the clinic, what do you do? What do I do? Well, you can guess. the first thing you do is you take out your phone and you have a look. Oh, what's what's happening? And of course, the first thing that pops up, even before I click on anything, as soon as it tells me, oh, it'll take you 30 minutes to drive home if you go this way. So Google are predicting what I'm going to do. Of course, they don't always get it right, but I guess a lot of the time they are. So how does this affect us as researchers, as teachers, as researchers of information systems? Well, let's think about what we used to think of what we were doing. Our previous research assumptions were that information systems capture information as a byproduct of human activity. So for example, you take some money out of an ATM, you get a receipt. Or you go to a store, you buy something, you get a receipt. So the receipt is a record of what you've just done. It's a byproduct of what you just did. And hopefully the receipt you get is accurate. You want it to be accurate, don't you? And timely. So that receipt reflects something that just happens. It reflects the world. And we want so what we've been teaching for many years is that we want our data models to be accurate, to represent, the business processes, represent the organization accurately. We want to represent the world well. And so, same with databases. We want to capture information about customers. Again, want to be timely, accurate, secure, all things we've been teaching for a long time. And so, if you're a retailer, e-commerce, for example, you want to know exactly what people's preferences are. You want to know what they like. You want to be accurate about their previous purchases and so forth. And of course, we still teach decision support systems. And what we have been teaching for a long time is that DSS don't make decisions. They just help managers. They help people to make decisions. So the information systems, data, information, knowledge, it all helps people, helps managers to make better decisions. So if you want to book a hotel, for example, you search booking.com or Expedia, whatever it might be, and you hope the ratings are accurate, you hope the information about the hotel is accurate. And so that's what we're doing. The systems represent the world, and they're better, the more accurate they are, the more timely they are, the better. But we're suggesting that this is now changing. And this is the idea of digital first. And the idea is that whereas systems used to represent the world, so the world is real, our systems are in effect a copy, now it's switching. That is, that we are now creating the world through digital. So now we have CAD software, computer-aided design software, computer-aided manufacturing software. We've had it for many years, actually. But what people are doing now, engineers are doing it, so forth, software designers, we are designing the products on the computer first, and then we are printing them. So the physical version becomes a reflection or a copy of the digital version, and it's not the other way around anymore. I'll give you some examples in a moment of airline tickets and boarding passes. But, and now we have cars which are starting to make decisions. We've got the self-driving car. And in fact, I'll tell you a interesting feature of the latest car, which my bought for my wife. It's a new car I bought just this year with my wife. What I've been quite surprised driving it, to tell you the truth. And what's happening is that it's a Mazda CX-5, very nice car. And what I found driving it recently is that if you're on the freeway and you start to change a lane and you don't indicate, and you're going at speed, of course, then not only does the car warn you, I mean, in the past, the cars would, you know, they had lane assist, you know, they warn you, but this does more than that. It actually moves the steering wheel. It actually makes it a bit harder to move the steering wheel. So you've actually got to use a slightly more force to change lanes. I found that a bit freaky, to tell you the truth, because what it means is that the car is now starting to take over. It's starting to drive for you. So, I mean, that's of course the self-driving car. The idea that the car decides what speed to go, when to brake, when to stop, where to go, and so forth. So the question is, of course, who's in charge? Who's in control? Are you in control? Well, we call this the ontological reversal, where it's digital first. Now, just to illustrate this a bit more, I'll talk about this a bit more, but here's an illustration. I mentioned the America's Cup just a little moment ago when I was showing the pictures of Auckland. Well, this yacht race will be held in Auckland next year in 2021. And it's regarded as the most prestigious yachting race in the world. It's like it's even more prestigious than the Olympics in a way for yachting people as well. Anyway, and what it is it combines the most innovative technology. They're always doing new things with the best sailors. So many of the sailors are Olympic gold. You know, they've won the gold and stuff at the Olympics. Anyway, they're always doing new things. Now, this particular cup in 2021, the way the America's Cup works is that the challenge, the host rather, in this case New Zealand, fortunately we won it last time, from Oracle actually, from Larry Ellison, we won it from him. But anyhow, the idea of this cup, it's quite biased in the way that it's unlike most other races where it's sort of fair. Well, it is kind of fair, except that in this case, the team that holds the cup, in this case the New Zealand team, they set the rules. So unlike most international competitions where you have rules agreed by an international body, this is totally different. It's the host. In this case, you know, last time it was Larry Ellison who set the rules, and so, but this time New Zealand set the rules, and the New Zealand team set the rules. What it means is that they tell everyone else what kind of boat you have to design. They say the boat has to look like this. It has to be designed like this. And if it doesn't meet these requirements, you're disqualified. And now what they did was they designed a boat that had never been sailed before in the real world. This is a single, I mean, they have had catamarans that are called foiling, but this is a single-hulled yacht that foils. Now, in effect, it flies. You see the picture I've got there. What happens is that the hull is actually out of the water, and it's in effect flying on these foils like skis. It's basically like a single-hull yacht on skis. Now, you can imagine this is pretty difficult because you haven't got a catamaran would be much easier. You've at least got two hulls. If you fall over, you've got the other hull to fall back on. But here you don't. You basically just got a single hull. It's pretty complicated. So of course you need some good system. I mean, and these things really go fast. They're going up to 80 kilometers an hour on the water. So you could get seriously injured if you have a problem, if the boat capsizes. Now, what was interesting is that when they first announced the rules for this yacht, this was about 2 or 3 years ago now, no such yacht had ever been built before. It had never been done. In fact, if you read the yachting magazine, at the time, they were all wondering, is this possible? They're saying, you know, this looks pretty dangerous. Can it be done? But what is interesting is that at least the engineers, the designers of this boat, had tested it virtually, digitally, and they were so confident that it would work that they said all the challenges now for this yacht race, you know, wherever they come from, yacht, there's one of the few from US, there's Italy and so forth, UK, Japan, you have to build the boat this way. Now, the thing is, these are usually billionaires that are entering this race, like Larry Ellison and so forth. These yachts cost over $100 million usually. So you imagine that here's the rules for the yacht. No one's sure it's going to work, and yet they're already having to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on getting this boat ready. And they've only just about the last year or so have they been actually sailing these things and testing them physically. Anyway, the key point being, it was digital first. It was designed on the computer first, tested on the computer. They were so confident it would work that people now around the world, these billionaires around the world, were spending millions of dollars on their boats saying, yeah, we think it's going to work. Digital first, physical second. So this is what I want to talk about now, is that what does it mean for us, this new world of digital first? What does it mean? And if we're doing research and teaching in this field, how should we be thinking about this? And in fact, we've actually just, it's mostly talk about research, but on the teaching front, we've actually changing our introductory course. You know, we teach in a business school. I'm in a business school, and we have a compulsory course for all business school students. We have a lot of them. You know, we have it's more than 1,000 students start every year. Anyway, our first year course now, we've totally redesigned it, and it's all about this idea of digital first. So that's what we're teaching all our business school students now, is this idea of digital first, and we're redesigning our course around this idea, you know, for companies and so forth and businesses. Anyway, so let's talk a bit more then in detail about our digital world. Well, first of all, I'm sure many of you young people, you're digital natives. You know, you grew up with technology, with your mobile phone. You're probably addicted to it. A lot of people are, and so you just take it for granted. You take it for granted that it's going to work most of the time. That you can chat to your friends. You can post, you know, stuff on WhatsApp, Twitter, whatever. You just take it for granted, and you use it for everyday activities. So, you know, whether you're looking at the weather, looking at the traffic, chatting with your friends, your mum or your dad or whatever, you just take it for granted. And so the digital world, this digital world which we're so used to now, is integrated into our physical world. You know, we look outside at the weather, and I'm looking at the weather today. In fact, say, oh, I wonder what's happening. Look at your phone, and it tells you what's going to happen in an hour or 2 hours time or something like that. Not always accurate, particularly in Auckland. It changes a lot. But anyway, it's kind of the idea. So in effect, what's happened is that we have now, in effect, a new digital culture where we just simply take it for granted. We don't even think about it. But it's happening so gradually. Like I mentioned, this car, I've been driving my wife's car, the CX-5. You know, now, I mean, most cars, if you're doing, the other thing is, you know, cruise control. You know, it has radar in the car, so even though you're going, you know, we're doing 100 kilometers along the road, another car slows down in front, it'll slow down automatically. You kind of get used to it, that it's doing things. It's sort of almost becoming a self-driving car, even a regular car, which is not, it's not called a self-driving car. It's not marketed as that, but yet it's already now starting to take over. Of course, we have digital artifacts like the music I mentioned, the songs, you know, they're digital, aren't they? The recordings, they're possessions. Actually, I don't possess CDs anymore. I just subscribe to Spotify. Of course, it's ubiquitous. So, you know, there's pretty much, well, not everywhere, but you could, most places in New Zealand, you can get cell phone reception. In some national parks, you can't, it's still not there, but Anyway, but you take your phone with you anyway and take photos with it. And I mentioned the digital objects, like the yacht, created before the physical counterpart. And sometimes digital objects replace physical objects. Now let's think about the e-ticket. You know, we've had this, actually this is more than 10 years old now, where the airlines, they actually said from, I think it was 2008, I think it was, they said from now on, from this particular date, I don't know exact date, but around there anyway, they said from now on, only e-tickets will be valid for travel. Now in the past, if you're like me, you traveled a lot before this time, you'd remember that the ticket more than 12 years ago was a physical ticket. You know, you had this piece of paper with multiple copies for every leg of your journey. You'd have this piece of paper, this ticket, and that was your right to travel. You had to have this piece of paper. If you lost that piece of paper, you'd have to buy another ticket. That was your right to travel. Nowadays, it isn't. Nowadays, it's in the system. It's the digital electronic ticket. If you can print out a copy if you want, but the printout is a copy and it's not actually real. I mean, for example, I usually fly quite a bit, you know, with my job at conferences and so forth, hoping to be in Brazil, of course, this time, but couldn't be there. But oftentimes you'll have I'm still old fashioned in some ways. I still like the printed copy just in case my phone dies or something happens, you know. I'm always risk averse that way. So I print out a copy, but oftentimes I find the physical copy is out of date and the airline has changed the time. So now, of course, I rely on other apps to tell me what the latest update is with the flight. In effect, the physical copy is becoming almost worthless because the airlines seem to be changing the times quite frequently sometimes. So the digital version is the real version. You see that? The digital version is the real one. And the physical one isn't. It's a copy which often is out of date. So that's a key idea. And of course we have physical objects with embedded digital capabilities, especially with IoT, you know, Internet of Things. You know, we've got air conditioners with Wi-Fi. We've got, well, we've already had TVs for a long time with Wi-Fi, but lots of other devices now can be connected. And of course, we have digital spectators, and I'll talk about this shortly, some of the problems with this. Of course, we also have convergence, products and services, like music, TV, and so forth. Photos, you know, the camera's improving all the time with the phones. We have, if you're in business school, of course, we talk a lot about digital transformation and new business models. I mean, think of Uber, you know, it's all these type of services. They rely on, it's combinatory, isn't it? It's a combination of other things like Google. You need Google Maps. Everyone needs to have a smartphone that uses the service. They themselves need to be connected to the network so they can see where the cars are, when the driver, or who the driver is, and so forth. It needs social media, of course, because you need to, well, some social aspect at least, because you need to rank the driver ranks you. There's rankings. So there's, you know, new ways of doing things. And of course, we have our favorite apps, which tell us what to do, where to stay, where to eat. I mean, I'm often using these apps when I'm traveling to see, you know, what I should do, where I should go, and so forth. So lots of things are happening in our world. And I've mentioned the airline tickets, boarding passes. You know, it's the digital version, it's the real version. You print out a boarding pass if you want, ticket if you want, but that's just a copy. And manufacturing, you print the product now, you design it first, then you print it. And of course, Google Maps tells us where to go, when, which way to go, how to get there. Now, a question I'd like just to ask, although I guess we'll have the questions later through the chat, but just for you to think about this, is the car just an avatar? Now, you've all seen the movie Avatar. The idea of an avatar is it does what you tell it to do. You're in charge. You're the one that's in control. Are you in control of a self-driving car? Well, I think the answer is, unfortunately, it's no. Because in fact, the former CEO of Google said, he's quoted as saying, one of the good things about the self-driving car is that it won't start if you're behind in your payments. So if you are, he said that. So he's thinking of it from a business point of view, of course, not from the customer point of view. So if you fall behind in your payments for, higher purchase payments or leasing it or whatever, the car won't start. So it's a clear indication who's in charge. It's the company that controls this. It's on the left here. Look at the picture here. This is the digital representation of where you are now and where you're going. This is actually, when you think about it, this is the real version. This is what you're going to be doing. And the car is simply obeying what's on the left. We used to think of it the other way around. We used to, if you think of it, normally you're driving a car and you'd look at a map in the old days and you'd be deciding which way you go. Now it's the reverse with the self-driving car, that you're in effect the passenger and the car is saying this is, and it could change, of course. You might say, I want to go this way, but then suddenly there's a traffic accident and the system will say, oh, you need to go somewhere else. And so you might not have a choice if there's a roadworks or there's something going on. But anyway, who's in charge? Well, and that's what freaked me out a little bit when I first started driving my wife's car, is that here I was driving along 100 kilometers an hour on the freeway and I want to change lanes. I didn't indicate because there was another car, anyway, and I'm changing lanes and it has this, it's only minor, but it's slight little resistance. When it sees the dotted line of the lane, it's sort of warning you physically, hey, don't go there. But of course you can still go at the moment, but it was just a little, I thought, oh, that's a bit weird. Anyway, it's getting more and more aggressive, I would say. So of course, from a business point of view, you look at these devices, the watches and so forth, who's your competition? Who is it? Which companies are you competing with? Is it this? Is this your competitor? Or is it this? And of course, when you think about it, it's actually the other phones, isn't it? It's other devices that you're competing with now. In effect, this one is something else. It's a fashion accessory nowadays, isn't it? It's not really needed anymore for telling the time. It's just, people just like it because it's kind of reminds them of what the world used to be like. And think of these devices. What are these devices competing with? Actually, I have an advertisement from a electronics store, a Tandy electronics store, about 25 years ago. And all the products in that store are in this one device. Every single thing. Camera, a compass, a radio, music, stereo, you name it. There's so many devices now embedded in this one phone. We call it a phone, of course. I mean, it's kind of a throwback, isn't it? We used to think that these things are phones where you make phone calls. But how often do you use this as a phone? How often do you make phone calls? It's mostly used for lots of other things. But anyway, we still like to call it phones. So what is our experience like in this digital world? What is happening? Well, this is a model that we've come up with. And we suggest that in the middle are computed human experiences. So almost everything we do nowadays is computed. Now, when you get up out of bed in the morning and you're about to have breakfast, what do? Well, I know what I do. I look at my phone. I see if, my kids or someone has said something because they, they're old now, they live somewhere else, they don't live with me anymore. I look at what they're up to. And whether you're booking a flight, you're listening to music. I listen to music on the way to work, so I drive to work, unfortunately, but at least I can listen to music on the way there and back. It's computed. Music I'm listening to is computed. It's so we have actors, we have people, we have artifacts, we have the things. We're in a place like here I am in Auckland. I want to find out the weather is today. So the information I need is the weather, of course, what's happening, and time. So we nowadays, we're relying more and more on these computed human experience, whether we're driving, whether we're taking photos, whether we're listening to music, watching TV, whatever it is, they're computed. And now we have this seamless integration between the physical reality and the digital reality. Now, of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit by saying that's digital first, but it's kind of I still like the idea. Because of course the digital systems still need to represent physical reality, so that's still there. We still need our databases to be accurate and timely and so forth. But what is happening, of course, is that more and more now, the digital is becoming first and now becoming the real. That is the real. And the physical now becomes a copy of the digital. So it's this seamless integration now. But of course we have some complications. We have multiple platforms. So, there's various platforms, Apple, Google, Amazon, there's all kinds of Samsung, there's all different types of platforms, iTunes and whatnot. And of course there's multiple institutional logics. Now, let me just illustrate this. If you think of the airline industry, and I talked about the e-ticket before, airline industry. Now in Brazil, let's say the government changes the tax on everyone leaving Brazil, the departure tax. So they increase it by $50, let's say. Well, just think what needs to happen there. First of all, every provider of any sort of airline booking service, whether it's a travel agent, airlines, needs to update their price so that everyone does that. They also need to make sure they pay the government as well. So the government wants to get its money, so they need to do that as well. The airlines also need to check that, usually the airlines have to do it to start with, that they've paid, customers have paid before they leave. But then there's an immigration as well, and they will probably check as well to make sure that, yes, you've got the approved. And if the airlines get it wrong, they get into trouble with the government, that's for sure. So it has to be right. So what is interesting is that you change just one thing, like the price of the departure ticket, and all these other things need to change. The platforms need to be updated, physical reality is updated because you need more money, of course. The digital, your experiences change because now you've got to pay more. The whole thing changes based on these logics. And notice it's all digital. That the whole thing is digital. The new charge is implemented digitally. All the booking systems are updated digitally. You will pay through internet banking or via credit card, probably digitally as well. So the whole thing is digital. So what do we have? We have highly evolutionary, that is, they're constantly adapting, complex, socio-technical. Now, they are social. We think of a lot of the digital systems as sort of being IT, information technology. Well, it's true, it is IT, but it's also people. So think of the songs I'm listening to on Spotify. It's what other people are listening to that are kind of like similar music to me. So Spotify is using big data, is based on what other people are doing, what other people are thinking. So it's social. Uber drivers, you know, the rankings, we give rankings for everything now, you know, songs, do you like this? Always asking you to rank this. Did you like your experience with this? Booking hotel, rank this, rank that, rank restaurants, rank your coffee, you know, rank everything. Rank your sports, your favorite sports stars, and in football, of course, you rank your favorite teams, you rank your players. Coaches make the decisions of who's going to play based on their rankings and so forth. And all of this, of course, is social. It's what we think the rank should be. So it is still people. So it's socio-technical. And this is to produce and consume user-generated trace data. Now notice that we are now the product. You know, we used to think of ourselves as users. We still are users, actually, but we are also the used. That is, every time you do something, like I listen to a song, I'm now a data point. I'm this person and I like this song. That data can now be used for the person in Brazil who also happens to like jazz and is listening to things like me, and they're using my data. What I did now is become data for Google or a company or Spotify or someone else. So it's user-generated data. And now whenever we sign up to an app these days, you usually click OK, and you're clicking OK to them gathering data about you. That's usually one of the requirements. So all that data, where you're going, what you're buying, where you are, what you're listening to, who your friends are, that all becomes data. It's user-generated trace data. What this means, that reverses how we used to think of artifacts. That Simon, one of the great thinkers, of course, in artificial intelligence, he said that environment is the mold in which the artifact's interface must fit. We've often talked about this. We've had research on this, haven't we? About fit. You know, you've got to fit the technology to the people and so forth. You know, we've talked about this for a long time. But now it's becoming the reverse. It's going, the reality is whatever the artifact, together with people, of course, defines it to be. So the digital participates in constructing and molding the environment. So it's kind of reversing now. In a way, it's kind of, the idea is that the digital is becoming a little bit more aggressive. That's kind of the way I would phrase it. And here's an illustration of where things are going. Now, of course, you've all heard the Google Glass. It didn't go too well. Glasses, they didn't go too well. People found them a bit too freaky. Well, here's another freaky sort of thing. Kind of, it's these earbuds you can buy now, and the product is advertised as control live sound. Now, some of you young people, I'm sure you see young people all the time. Well, many times anyway. They're wearing earbuds all the time, and they listen to their music as they're walking along the road or running or something. Well, this product takes it one step further, and it's called active listening. That is, this is continually editing, if you like, the sounds around you. So so you can, as it says, it gives you the power to control the sounds around you. So if something is too loud, like your mum is telling you off, she's telling you to do something, to a chore around the house, you can turn her off. Just turn her off, you don't hear anything. But if you want to hear something else instead, like you like the sound of the birds outside rather than your mum, you turn the birds up. So it's taking it one step further, where you're actually controlling your whole world, becomes in effect curated. Well, the sound you're listening to at least becomes curated, by the system. And of course, the same thing is happening with our social world. And maybe some of you have seen the movie. I highly recommend it, The Social Dilemma. A very interesting movie that's come out on Netflix recently. But anyway, but our social world is computed as well now. You know, if you use Facebook or Twitter or all these other apps, Reddit or whatever, you know, LinkedIn, in effect, what happens is now you start to move slowly. To start with, it was just, it was a reflection of the real world. But now it's becoming the other way around, where the system suggests who your friends should be. It suggests what, you know, and you start actually going with it. You know, you start actually slowly, gradually but surely, you start changing, you know. And so anyway, and what is interesting about, say, these apps like Facebook, LinkedIn, and so forth, every time you look at your screen, every time you look at your app, it's different. And it's computed at the point of consumption. So if you look at your Facebook page on your phone right now, in 1 hour's time, or just a few minutes time, I guarantee it'll be different. Unless, of course, you don't have any friends. If you don't have any friends, if you don't have any contacts or any you know, then maybe it stays the same. But if you have quite a few, it's continually being updated, always changing, and it's computed at the point of consumption as when you look at it. So what is happening is that now, as we do things, we organize things, it's what we call a performative enactment, that it's performed, it's computed at the point of consumption, because, you know, our systems are getting so fast now, they can do that. So just to illustrate, if you want to drive from point A to point B, and you look at your navigation app, like Google Maps or TomTom, whatever it might be, the system needs to know where you are right now. It needs to know, you need to know where you want to go. And it needs to know what the traffic situation is in between those 2 points. And it needs to know if you're driving or walking or, you know, catching public transport or whatever. Now, it's only any good, of course, if it's right up to date right now. If it's out of date, it's not much use. Actually, it would be frustrating, wouldn't it? So it's computed at the point, right at that very second, you look at the way, you know, the map app, it's computed right then and there at the point of consumption. So what are some of the challenges for us as researchers? Well, on the left here, we have some legacy research themes, and on the right, some emerging themes. You know, and of course, the left's still very important. We still need to do all this, you know, still, but the right is sort of new ideas, some new things we need to start doing. On the left-hand side, we've studied for a long time information, user requirements, you know, we've done that for a long time. Now, becoming more important, computed human experiences. Systems representing the world. Now, digital technology shaping our world, starting to take over. Information systems at the individual organizational firm level, of course. Now we start to talk about ecosystems, whole ecosystems of, you know, when you get IoT, Internet of Things, you get whole devices become part of a whole big ecosystem. And now, you know, we used to talk, well, we still do talk about adapting systems to people and society. Now we have to adapt our behaviors sometimes to systems. Think of the traffic. As cars change, we need to change the laws. We need to change people's driving habits. Then, you know, we need to change way we do things. And for many years in business schools, at least, we focused on efficiency and effectiveness. Still very important, of course. But nowadays, I think much more important, human values. Whose values are inscribed into our systems? Now, a lot of developers, systems designers, developers, human experience designers, of course, they take their own values for granted. That they tend to think that their own values are the right ones, and they don't even question them. But actually, what's becoming more important now is the values inscribed to devices, and this sort of kind of explains the dispute at the moment between the US and China. You think of the apps like TikTok and so forth. All these devices, they inscribe certain values, and some are more controlling, more authoritarian, some more libertarian, and so forth. There's all these things: safety, security. In China, they value safety and security more than some other things, and in US, they value freedom more than anything. Anyway, these things are going to become quite important, I think, when we start talking about which app you're going to use, which app you're going to be allowed to use. It's all going to be based, a lot of it's going to be due to which values are inscribed into the devices. Who's spying on you? Who accesses the data? This kind of thing. So here's the challenges I suggest for IS research. First of all, we just need to be studying what is happening and why. Often these companies don't realize what they're doing. If you watch the movie The Social Dilemma, you will realize that some of these senior people like Google and Facebook and so forth, they thought they were doing a good thing. And they say this many times in that movie, we never realized that this would be happening. Now that's our job as academics. We should be the thinkers. We are the ones reflecting on these things. So we should be the ones that are raising these questions about, what is happening, why it's happening, what the implications are for business, for society, for people. I think that's our job. Of course, there's new forms of strategic advantage. Lots of good ways lots of excellent ways for businesses to improve our lives, to do better things, with lots of opportunities. And of course, we have new jobs, like the Chief Digital Officer. It's a new role now in parallel or to the CIO's, Chief Information Officer. Need to figure out what the benefits are, what the downsides are for society of some of these things. And of course, there are some unanticipated consequences of technology. And if you watch that movie, highly recommend it. People don't anticipate what's going to happen. In fact, technology people historically have been very poor. They've been very bad at predicting what's going to happen. They don't think of, what might happen later. In fact, in that movie, you often see them saying, oh, we thought social media would be such a good thing, would help people be connected and so forth, which is true, it did. But think of all the negative things happening with social media now, with bullying, with influencing elections, the fake rankings, there's all kinds of things going on, fake news and so forth. So if we think of our job, well, I belong to this, our international association, AIS, Association for Information Systems, and the mission is this: to serve society through the advancement of knowledge and promotion of excellence in the practice and study of information systems. Now, I like this mission. Notice our main mission is not for the business, it's to serve society. Now, I think that's the right way to think about it. In fact, businesses should be serving society anyway, shouldn't they? Should be making our lives better, not worse. But of course, there are many threats to this as well. So I've talked about self-driving cars. Who's in charge? Well, in future, it will be the algorithm that decides how you get there and whether you can get there at all. In fact, I will make one. I know I just said technology people are very bad at making predictions. I will stick my neck out and make one prediction. And I predict that in future, it could be 20 years away, I'm not sure, maybe not that long away. I predict that in future, governments will prohibit people from driving their own cars. I can guarantee this will happen in New Zealand at least, because we have these governments now that are, we often call them nanny state. That is, they're risk of, they want to protect people, which is good. You know, they want to protect people. They're sort of banning fizzy drinks in schools, sugar drinks in schools, this kind of thing. You know, they ban smoke. You know, they do all kinds of things to try and protect you. Well, I think what they will say is it's too dangerous. People driving their own cars is dangerous, and it's true. People still dying every year on our roads. And so I can almost guarantee that in the future, the governments will say, you're not allowed to drive your own car. You will have, the self-driving car will take over completely. And you'll still be able to drive a car, but that'll be on a special like little racetrack. You know how you see that people think it's like going back in time, where you can have a little drive, you can have fun driving around a theme park in a car, like you can now with a go-kart sometimes. It'll be like that, I think. That's my prediction. So anyway, I've mentioned about our values, and we have to contribute to the debate. Now, what are some of the unintended consequences? Well, here's a good example of the digital taking over. I'm sure you've all heard of the story about the pilot, Sully Sullivan. There's a movie about it. He ended up having to land this Airbus on the river in New York. What happened is he takes off from the airport. There's a bird strike. Both engines are out. He has no choice but to land on the river. And fortunately, this pilot was a former Air Force pilot. He was flying fighter jets before he ended up doing this job. So he was a very experienced pilot. And but he had to land on the river. Now, what he wanted to do and what he planned to do was, he was coming, if you think of a duck coming into land and water, what it will do is it lands like that. Now you come in gradually, slowly, as slowly as possible, and you want to have the nose up, so you'll sort of come down and gradually the nose will drop. Well, guess what happened? This was an extremely experienced pilot, many years of experience. He's coming in like this, and all of a sudden, last few seconds, the nose comes down. That's the last thing he wanted. Because you imagine, because the problem was the software was designed, the designers had thought you'd never land on a river. You'd always land on a runway. So the designers never anticipated the situation. So the pilot suddenly finds, out of his control, like my car that's trying to prevent me changing lanes. You think so, you know, anyway, same thing. But this time it actually takes over and the nose comes down, it's flat. Now you can imagine if there'd been a few waves, fortunately it was a very calm day, but if there'd been a few waves in this river, been rough, the nose could have hit a wave and it would have gone pole pitch like this. And that could have killed everyone in the plane. You know, it would have been disastrous. So here's an example where the digital took over. It took over. The pilot didn't expect it. And it could have been disastrous. And because the designers never thought this would happen. And here's another example, automating inequality. If you just, in the US, if you have big data using all the reports, and it shows quite clearly that black people are arrested more often than white people. What does that show? Does it show that black people are more likely to be criminals? Is that what it shows? Or does it tell you about police behavior? What does it tell you? Well, this is the thing, you see, is that it depends how you interpret that data. And anyway, there's this associate, she's a professor she's written this book called Virginia Eubanks about automating inequality. And she sort of raised the alarm about the fact that big data is sometimes automating inequality. And I think this is something we have to think about and be careful about. And of course, a recent book by Shoshana Zuboff, in fact, she's featured in the movie I mentioned. She's quite raising the alarm about Google and Facebook and so forth. She's a professor at Harvard University. I've met her actually, but anyway, she's at Harvard. And she's suggesting that we're reaching this dangerous point now where the tech companies are becoming too powerful. The idea is, for example, that the product is not just, we are not just the product anymore, it's our behavior becomes the product. That they want you to buy more stuff. So Google is essentially an advertising company. They're basically, what they're doing is they're gathering as much data as possible about you. Of course, that's what companies want to do. All companies would like to find out as much as possible about you, so then they can predict and curate your future. So you like this song? Well, maybe you'd like this one too. It's only a little bit more expensive. So that's the idea. Now, of course, I love Spotify. I think it's fantastic. But she's raised the alarm about it becomes much more dangerous in future. That's what she's suggesting anyway. Highly recommend the book, by the way. What about the future of work? Robotics, AI, automation. It's all coming, of course. We know it's all coming, but who's in control of it? You know, a lot of the movies now, they have it where the AI is taking over. Well, to some extent, it already has actually, in lots of ways. But if in our field, at least, I think we're okay for a while because we teach these things. And the Australian Computer Society wrote a report just 2 years ago saying that for Australia, this was, demand for ICT workers is significantly growing. So our enrollments are good. They've been up for a long time. And so people need these digital skills. And of course, that's what we do. You know, we train them, upskill them, educate them. But I still think we need to do a better job of thinking more broadly about what the, you know, society as a whole. I think all our students should be aware of these things. So to conclude, we're living in a digital world. It's now becoming digital first, physical second. And what that means, there's huge challenges for us now, for our work, for our life, you know, people, technology, culture. And I think we need to really think about some of these things more deeply. As I mentioned, a lot of people don't realize what's happening. And what does it mean for us? What does it mean for our research? What does it mean for society, for our business schools and so forth? And my last question is, will we design a better world or will we make it worse? You know, I hope it's going to be better. I'm still optimistic. But, you know, there's a lot of other things happening as well, but let's hope so. So thank you very much and hope you found it interesting. Now look forward to some questions on the chat.
Professor Michael Myers, thank you very much for your insightful presentation. I'm quite sure that everyone in the audience now has many questions in their minds, at least, and perhaps some questions for Professor Myers. We have one from Alexandre Gramel. Alexandre, do you want me to read or would like to ask him the question? I'll pass the microphone to you. Alexandre Gramel, please.
Okay, Professor Myers, well, when I read your paper, the MIS quarterly paper, you seemed, well, still descriptive as you were today, but a little less pessimistic. I had a feeling on our future with respect to where we are going with this digital, you know, with the digital first. At least you spent much more time in your talk now telling us about all the possible negative results of this situation. And in fact, that was I have to admit, what had bothered me a little in the paper, because I thought, well, when we get to the research questions and everything, most of them were still saying, well, we have to think about the ethics and this and that, but you didn't stick your finger into the wounds, I believe, in the paper the way you did today. But my question here is, I mean, we now have these young executives, most of them born, well, as you call native, digital natives, that already take all of this for granted, as you said. So my impression is wasn't this all already designed in the 90s? Because when I remember those papers by Venkatraman and Henderson, and what they were proposing us that was the way to go, it seems that we finally got there in terms of organizations really getting it, that the digital happens first. But they were already telling us this in the 90s, weren't they?
That's true. Yes, in fact, a lot of these things, we've sort of talked about them for a long time, but only now, I suppose, is it actually happening. That a lot of things that we talked about earlier are happening now. And I don't think we really realize the implications, how far-reaching it would go. I mean, one difference between what Venkatraman and the other scholars we talked about 20 years ago is that they mostly just talked about business. They talked about strategy, strategic advantage, competitive advantage, and how businesses could provide better service and so forth. But they didn't talk about anything else. They didn't talk about, what you do at home, or it was all sort of focused on business and work. They really ignored the other parts of our lives, like what music we listen to and that kind of thing. So I think that's what's changed, is that now digital is not just for business, it's for everything, for every industry, for everything that you do. And that's a big shift, I think.
Thank you, Professor Myers. Anyone would like to pose another question? I have a question, Professor Michael. How do you think we are listening a lot about the pandemics and COVID-19 influence on digital transformation? Do you think that this pandemic did accelerate the digital transformation and the issues that you are talking in your paper?
Well, definitely. I think one sort of good thing, I suppose, about digital in the pandemic is that I'm able to, well, I hope it's a good thing, is that I can participate in your conference.
Yes.
And I can give my presentation. In the past, we wouldn't have been able to. But now, fortunately, our internet connection is good enough. I'm at home right now, and fortunately, my internet connection is good enough that I can talk to you in Brazil. Fantastic. So that's great that we can still do, we can still teach and things remotely. We wouldn't have been able to do it. Maybe even 5-10 years ago, the technology would not be good enough. Still not. I still like to be there, of course, but that's one thing. But I think what's the other thing is that actually, if you don't mind me advertising, we've got a special communications section of the European Journal of Information Systems right now. I'm the incoming editor-in-chief of that journal at the beginning of next year. And we've had a few articles coming out recently about COVID-19 and information technology, digital with COVID-19. So there's lots of good things happening and some potentially negative things as well. Here in New Zealand, we've got an app. It's contact tracing. You want to record, the government wants to know where people have been, what they're doing, so they can quickly stamp out any new infections. That's good. Good reason. I suppose the issue is what are the longer term implications of having all this data about people, for privacy, surveillance, and so forth. And that's a question, I think, a question mark there. And just going back to what the previous person said about a little bit more negative today, I think, yeah, I guess I've only just saw that movie, The Social Dilemma, just a few days ago. So that's what sort of, that's kind of maybe turned my talk a little bit more negative than it was before. But I'm still fairly optimistic at the moment.
Yes,
overall.
We should keep optimistic about the possibilities of technology. We have another question. Baroni, would like to pose your question, or can I read it?
Oh, there's another question here I've seen.
Yes, yes.
the question is, discuss the impact of technology on our behavior. What are his view of the impact of technology on our bodies, bioinformatics, enhanced human bodies, and so forth? Yeah, I think that's a excellent question. And I think potentially this is really good. I mean, potentially, I mean, there are many people that suffer from many, you know, there are whole kinds of diseases. In fact, just before this, this presentation, I watched a Twitter little video sent by my son. He lives in Melbourne, Australia. And it was about someone with Parkinson's disease. And they're able to, you know, like with Parkinson's, they're constantly shaking, you know, because they're shaking. I hope it's a real video. I wasn't quite sure, actually. It looked real, but it seemed that they'd somehow, it did explain, use technology, maybe a chip in the brain or something like that, to control the shaking. And the person, the patient, is very happy with that. So I think there's lots of things we can do that will improve our health, our well-being. You know, think of old people in rest homes. Sometimes they have all kinds of things. You know, they could, monitoring might be good to monitor, you know, if they fall or something, or, so lots of potential. Of course, there's with all these technologies, there's always dangers as well. And I think that's where we have to sort of be actively involved in setting policies, you know, for governments. You know, this is where the lawyers come in with regulations and governments and so forth. I think this becomes much more important. We have to make sure that these technologies are used for good. I think that's the key thing.
Amarolinda would like to make a question.
I think Edmara raised her hand first.
Edmara, I will pass the mic to you.
Okay. Thank you, Cesar. Thank you for your presentation, Professor Myers, very insightful. It's not a question, it's a comment related to a Brazilian issue of automating inequalities. Brazilian federal government emergency aid to face the COVID-19 emergency, but there were several serious issues related to the process, to the information process, and the lack of a database integration created a mess on the identification of all citizens eligible for the emergency aid. Consequently, lots of people who fulfilled the criteria were not able to receive the aid. And so these people were facing serious difficulties and they were not able to get to the money. So increasing the inequalities and increasing their difficulties. So it's a paradox because we have a very innovative application of IT, but at the same time, or sometimes basic IT resources like database integration technologies, very well-known technologies, they don't work. So it's a kind of a sad example we are facing this year of automating inequalities. It's just a comment.
Yeah, that is a sad, as you say. I mean, I'm not familiar with that particular case, but and what actually happened. But let's just, well, I would just hope that it was unintended and not intended to automate inequality. I think that's what often happens with these systems, is that often it's an unintended consequence. The designers didn't even, you know, the developers didn't even realize this is what would happen. I hope that was the case and that it wasn't intended to be automate inequality. But I don't know, I'm only guessing.
Okay, thank you, Professor Myers. We have another question in the chat. What do you think to use social innovation to face problems emerged from technological innovation? I think.
Yes, I think that's good. I think you know, our culture, social structures are always changing. We're always, you know, culture is never static, and our social norms, the way we do things, is always changing. And so I think this is one thing that particularly we have to do nowadays is we have to adapt quite quickly nowadays to new things, to new technologies. You know, whether it's your car, whether it's whatever it is, you know, we have to adapt fairly quickly. And I think, so yes, I think social innovations, new ways of doing things, hopefully they're positive, and let's hope they improve our world and not make it worse. I mean, some social innovations do make things worse sometimes, but let's hope that at least we can contribute to making things better.
Marolinda?
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Myers, for your talk. I was thinking while you were speaking. For me, one important question regarding the digitalization is the relationship of digital innovation with institutional arrangements. And we know that the institutions, they don't change as fast as technology. And this is a thing that I have been working on. And I keep thinking how we could use this technology to accelerate the process through which we can influence changes in institutions, for instance, legislation and regulations. Because what we have seen is that people that influence these regulations and legislations, for instance, they, on the one hand, they are very ignorant about technology, but at the same time, they are defending the interests of very powerful actors. So what do you think about how we could react and influence the beneficial changes in institution using technology? Because what we have seen sometimes is that they walk in totally different paths, or at least not in the same rhythm.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and quite difficult to solve, I think. Because as you say, there are very powerful people, and they have certain interests. And yeah, that's quite tricky, I think. I think, yeah, and people tend, well, we've said for a long time that people resist change. I don't think young people do, but they do resist change if it's against their interests, even now. You know, I mean, people like change if it's good for them, but they don't like change if it's bad. If they're going to lose their job, if they're going to lose money, lose their investment, they don't like that. And so, and people will, you know, they will certainly resist that. So I think, how do you change that? That's quite difficult. I think it's actually, I do have a few research projects as well, with projects at the moment with my PhD students. And one of them, for example, is looking at how a democratic movement in Guatemala, he's from Guatemala, and we're still writing the paper at the moment. He's just finishing his PhD. He's just finished his PhD, actually. We haven't written the paper yet, but his story is about how social media was used to draw attention to an injustice by the then government in Guatemala, and it ended up with, you know, massive protests against the government, and ended up changing the government. So this is basically a story of some Democrats or social media being used to enhance democracy. That's really the story, and that's what happened. Now, I'm not saying that could happen everywhere, but it certainly happened in this place, in this case. So I think that's kind of the thing, that technology can be used for good. I mean, in the US, we're seeing it being used negatively right now. No, it's just the opposite. It's being, in fact, this is interesting, is that in the US, social media seems to be used to try and thwart democracy, you know, with these fake ads and what interference in the election and so forth. But in Guatemala, at least, the story we have is just the opposite, where social media enhanced democracy and gave more power to the people. And so it's just the opposite. So I think that can change institutions. That can change things for the better, I think. So it's possible.
Thank you, Professor. We have one more question. Pietro, I will pass the mic to you, Pietro Dolce.
Hello. Okay, it's nice to meet you. I have one question about governance. Do you think that our current IT governance or governance models is enough to respond this transformation, or do you think we have to change something or have to add something to try to get this whole new world or this new technology that we are using? So thank you.
Yes, that's a good question. Thank you. Yes, I think we do need to change things, but I think, well, one thing that's already changing is that many companies are now appointing a chief digital officer. Now, when you think of the differences between a CIO and a CDO, chief digital officer, there are a few differences. The CIO typically was focused more on the systems, on the technology, you know, keeping things running. And so, I mean, obviously was involved to some extent in innovation, but the chief digital officer is much more customer focused. It actually combines marketing and information systems. Now, you know, marketing, you know, is a discipline which talks about customers, consumers, you know, they're really focused on that. Whereas traditionally, information systems, we focused on users. We even use different terms, users. You know, what does a user mean? Well, a user is the opposite of a developer. You know, developer is in control. The user just uses the system. That's kind of the idea, isn't it? Is that there's this contrast between developers or designers and users. In marketing, though, the consumer, well, in recent years, has become a lot more powerful. That the customer, the consumer, actually can, through technology, through social media and so forth, it becomes more powerful, because in the past, you make a complaint to the company, they just sort of ignore you. Nowadays, you write a review on Facebook or Twitter or something, it gets liked by people. All of a sudden, oh no, it creates a storm of protest against the company. It could be disastrous. So companies are a lot more worried now about, you know, what people are saying on social media. So the thing is, a chief digital officer now needs to be aware of that. They need to be sort of plugged in, if you like, not just the technology, but also what their customers are thinking. And that's a different mindset. You know, it's you're not just focusing on the business processes and the technology, you're also focusing on all the marketing stuff. So I think that's a much bigger role. And so that changes the governance, I think, because now the structure of what you used to call the IS, you know, the IT group, whatever you call it, digital services, or whatever you might call it, information technology and services, you know, there's all different names for the group that looks after your technology. But all of a sudden that needs to change, because you need the marketing people, you know, the people who are looking after your digital, you know, your front face of it, you know, your customer facing stuff, that needs to be integrated as well. So it's sort of integrating all the marketing stuff with IS. So that's a big change in governance, I think.
Thank you, Professor Meyer. I would like to make a final question, and it's regarding researchers. You talked about a new responsibility we, as researchers, we have to discuss and let's say and explain all these issues to the general public. So if you could add a few words talking what kind of researchers we could are important now in your view that we should seek to do.
Yeah, well, I think we're already doing it to some extent, but there's lots of new, you know, I'm always interested in the new things that are happening. And I think that's what we should be studying is, you know, if you're in a business school, I suppose you mostly focus on business, you know, yes, companies yes. and so forth. but you know, there's lots of opportunities for businesses to do new things. So new apps, new processes, new services, new products. There's all kinds of new things that are coming up all the time. And I think, but the thing is, the companies themselves, I mean, many years ago, I worked for IBM, so I was in industry for a few years. I just remember when I was doing that job, I was so busy, you know, with the job, and I didn't really have time to think about the bigger consequences, the big picture. I was just interested in the systems we were selling, the systems were the companies we were trying to help, and products and so forth. So we're very much focused on the here and now, you know, how they could do things now and improve things now and get more money now. That's what we were selling. But as scholars, I think and in fact, in this movie that I mentioned, The Social Dilemma, all these senior people, they didn't really think about the bigger consequences of what they were doing. And I think that's what we should be doing. I think that's one of our jobs. So it's you know, we have the opportunity as researchers to do that. So that's really, I think, you know, there's lots of things. There's privacy, there's security,
the ethical
security. There's
I see
there's all kinds of things.
Thank you, Professor. Well, we have 2 more minutes if you kindly can answer one last question. Professor Eduardo Diniz, he's asking how this new reversal ontology will impact our methodological approaches.
That's a good question. Yes, I think we do need to, I hadn't actually thought of this just yet, but that's something I need to think about, I think. So I'd only be guessing at the moment, but that's certainly a good question. That's the next step, isn't it? Think about how it does affect our methodologies. And in terms of research methodology, if that's what you mean.
Yes.
If that's what you mean, yeah, okay. Then research methodologies, yeah. I think it does affect things quite a bit, because it means that, I mean, I'm a qualitative researcher, so I must do qualitative research, but there's so much data now that is on in digital form, you know, social media and so forth. In fact, you know, there's so much of it that that now becomes the challenge. That how do you know, qualitative, you know, one of the things about qualitative research is that you're mostly focused on you're studying something in depth. You know, that's what you're getting, is an in-depth study of something. And if you've got all this huge amount of data, how do you do that? Yeah, and so that's a challenge, I think. And I have actually written about this, but yeah. So, but there's a challenge, and I think we have to become experts in a way with the tools, data mining tools, and so forth, and Leximancer or NVivo, whatever it might be, with software that can help us analyze this sort of stuff and this data. And so it becomes more challenging, I think, in some ways, because another question with all this data is, can it be trusted? I mean, you know, you can, I guess it always has been a question, but it's even more so with digital, because you know, you have fake reviews, you have fake news, you have bots, you have all kinds of things that are doing stuff. And is this person real? You know, these are all questions, new questions that emerge that we didn't have to worry about before.
Professor Meyer, in name of our community, IS community, Brazilian IS community here, represented by the attendees, I would like to thank you very much for coming here and presenting your ideas, your insightful speech. Thank you very much, Professor Myers. I hope everyone is applauding. We can't hear them, but they are, okay?
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Professor Mike.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Hope
Bye then.
Thank you so much.
In Brazil, perhaps.
Yeah, hope to see you someday again.
Thank you very much, Professor Mike. Bye-bye.